Welcome to the Great American Epic, where we discuss The Walking Dead. Today we'll pick up from where we were last time. This is part 2 of the lecture, Rick and the Spiritual Climax. It's not really possible to rank acts of transgression, but arguably the worst thing Rick does, certainly the most cataclysmic, is lead a mercenary mass murder of people whom he does not know and who have not done him or his community any harm. This happens in Season 6. If one were to ask me which episodes of The Walking Dead to watch if they only had time to watch a few, unquestionably my answer would be the final 2 episodes of Season 6 and the first 2 episodes of Season 7. These should certainly be canonical. They are gripping and the material climax of the entire narrative, which is to say, not the spiritual one. These follow shortly on the mass murder Rick leads. That takes place in episode 12 of Season 6. Briefly, a guy who ironically goes by the nickname Jesus recruits an already hot-headed, cold-hearted Rick to help with the situation. Rick and our group, we must still call them our group, have been on, to be fair, the verge of starving. I don't want to get into the weeds of the ins and outs of all of this. Who raises the idea first? Who strikes the deal officially? Who decides on the particular course of action? How much justification any given member of our group may or may not have had for moving forward with the atrocity. Essentially, there is a community called Hilltop, which is oppressed by a community who refer to themselves as saviors. The saviors lord it over Hilltop, demanding half of all of what the fruitful Hilltop community produces under threat of violence. A few of the members of our group have, to be fair, had an encounter with these people who make similar demands on them under penalty of death. Regardless, what our group offers, consents to, and seems all too eager to do is by any measure a bridge too fast and too far. And it comes from that place where Rick is, that place of cold-hearted cockiness, an impulse itself to take, to rule, to lord it over others in a certain kind of survivalist self-righteousness. Others can debate the morality of what the group does. They somewhat debate it among themselves. Morgan hardly finds it defensible. And Glenn, a crucial character in all this and what's to come, seems somehow at once in dread of what he is doing, even as he goes along and participates. Carol, it's important to note, is in a phase now where she does not want to kill anymore. She's sick of it all. She's at her limit. She just wants to escape any situation in which she will have to murder again. For her, this means, unfortunately, leaving everyone she loves, because she knows, she says, that if she's around those she loves and they are endangered, she will kill on behalf of them, and she senses it's time to stop. She plays a peripheral role in the mercenary killing, and by the time the saviors retaliate, she's already decided to, as it were, walk away. Her arc will be the subject of a later lecture. What exactly does our group do? They go into a savior outpost and murder all the men there in their sleep. Little do they know how large the Savior network is, much less the terror of its power. Once they experience it, then, arguably, they have just cause for war. But they kill everyone in their sleep indiscriminately, without much insight, intelligence, or conscience. And the show, the epic, makes them pay for it. In other words, the atrocity is not lost on the epic. I've often considered that it's something like a case of Homeric poetic justice that Odysseus, who played such a distinctively devious role in the Greek victory in the Trojan War, which lasted for 10 years, is fated to lose exactly another 10 years, despite his famous cunning, trying to get back to his home and family. We know that epics frequently have underworlds, and in another talk I've discussed how by nature the zombie gothic world is a kind of all-pervasive underworld. But there is another more specific, localized, traditional underworld that our characters enter as a consequence of what they do at the Savior outpost. For the first time in the entire epic, they are placed under Rick's leadership in an entirely vulnerable, entirely inescapable, entirely unwinnable situation. This is at the end of season 6. And what is so powerful for us as audience in this scene is that never before have we witnessed our characters subject to an evil antagonist while their consciences are themselves not clear. When Negan, the central antagonist, the antagonist of all antagonists in The Walking Dead, makes his appearance in the finale of season 6 and makes his long, epic speech, he is certainly not right to do the things he will do. But it's hardly incorrect to say that our heroes, in this instance, do not deserve, on a strictly moral reading, decisive judgment and punishment. And they know it, somewhere deep down. Because, in fact, they are not, any of them, too far gone. They know that in this particular misfortune, they're guilty. So through their eyes, when Negan stands over them, while they're tied up, lined up, middle of the night, surrounded, they're seeing a villain in a way they never have before. There was a time when Rick and the group were locked in a train car and all seemed hopeless, and Rick famously declared that the antagonists there didn't know who they were dealing with. It's one thing to be trapped, terrorized, and victimized when one is innocent, as the group then definitely was. They had sought sanctuary, had been promised it, only to find their good hopes betrayed. It's quite another thing to be trapped, terrorized, and victimized when one is guilty. This we can see in the looks on all of the characters' faces as they tremble before Negan. It's a fear and trembling, to cite Paul, quote, "work out your salvation in fear and trembling," that registers on another level, a spiritual dimension. And that's why Negan is a Satan figure here. This is not my projection, it's clearly determinate in the epic. And since Milton's Paradise Lost, Satan, of course, has not been absent from the epic heritage. As a matter of fact, the Satan imagery is hard to miss. Negan is dressed, first of all, vividly in red and black. He occupies the position of hellish damnation. His weapon has a name. It's a baseball bat that he refers to as, quote, Lucille. Lucille, we will later learn, was a real person, Negan's wife who died tragically long ago before Negan became apparently too far gone. But this weapon, this bat named Lucille, has an etymology much deeper in this moment, resonant, of course, with Lucifer, the supposed angel of light. Lucifer, the fallen angel, symbol of all symbols of one who is terribly, totally too far gone. Gone not just from basic humanity, but gone from an angelic nature. Perhaps this is why Negan's bat is covered in barbed wire, so it catches the light. It was the psalmist who famously wrote that we human beings are, quote, a little lower than the angels. Our group is now, let's say, only a little higher than the devils, and what happens is the most gruesome, infamous, and perhaps controversial event in The Walking Dead. We might note, in passing, how the baseball bat is a symbol of America, how the Savior's way of operating, exploiting the resources of other weaker communities, may have some relevance in today's geopolitical real world. Negan calls it, quote, the New World Order. The Savior's headquarters is a factory, which is ironically referred to as the sanctuary. A sanctuary presumably from the world outside, where goods are taken, where communities exist in a state of debt under threat of violence, where existence is precarious, lives are disposable, military and development are not so supreme. The relationship between a metropole and a periphery in colonial language. But back to the poetics of hell. Simon, Negan's lieutenant, the one who keeps trapping our group as they try to escape before they're captured, lined up, and forced to, quote, meet the man, tells them at every turn tauntingly, quote, there are plenty of ways to get to where you're going. It's the inverse of what Christ, Savior figure of all Savior figures, says in the gospel about what early Christians called, quote, the way. Quote, straight is the way, and narrow is the gate which leadeth unto life, as the King James Version renders it. Quote, there are plenty of ways to get to where you're going, Simon says, as the group increasingly finds that there is no way out for them, and they are imperiled beyond belief. They have not chosen the straight and narrow, on the contrary. It's a cold night. Hell is cold, as is where Satan is in Dante's Inferno. But the symbol of fire is provided by the amber lights of automobiles that illuminate the scene. One of the first things Negan says to Rick is that it was, quote, not cool for him to have killed so many of his men. The dialogue in The Walking Dead is composed of everyday language, but one should not for this mistake its Shakespearean quality of multi-layeredness and vast resonances. Quote, not cool, Negan says, as Rick and company have arrived in hell. Negan tells them all as they tremble that now they work for him. He tells them that they are no good to him dead. Satan, too, famously wants followers to do his bidding, not to put people out of their misery. Faust. How could we forget to mention Faust? Rick finally tries to compromise, of course, in weak trepidation. There's no more deal to be had, though, no more negotiation. Their souls have already been sold for food which they would not believe for or work for in another way. Negan's way of terrorizing is to kill sparingly but brutally, absolutely remorselessly, a figure with zero compunction, zero reservations. It is a hell scene. The episode is entitled Last Day on Earth. The surface level reading of this is clear. It's the last day on Earth, notoriously for Abraham and then for Glenn. Why these two characters in particular at this moment in the narrative, I won't go at length here to explain. Suffice it to say, there is meaning in it in both cases. For one thing, Glenn is the one character who showed the most hesitation regarding the murders. In the process of killing the men in the satellite station in their sleep, he even does something paradoxically sacrificial. He steps in to murder a second man so that his friend Heath doesn't have to. So Heath is allowed to go on living his life without having such a nauseous and evil act directly on his conscience. Glenn sits judged, but he also sits, compared to the others, least in a place of condemnation. So he dies perhaps not fully gone, not as far gone. And anyway, such ghosts of goodness are something Satan would like to eradicate. They have no place in hell. The other meaning of last day on earth is the one that marks our character's entrance into this particular American gospel underworld. It's their first day in hell. I will stop here for now, and we will pick up on this later.